Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are really opening the floodgates on a critical and frankly pretty unnerving analysis of the US-Russia relationship. It seems like it's moved way beyond just the proxy fight in Ukraine.
Oh, absolutely. It's evolved into something quite new, hasn't it? We're seeing unconventional warfare tactics, serious economic coercion. This isn't the old Cold War playbook anymore.
Not at all. And that's what we want to dive into. It feels like a critical escalation, and it's straining NATO alliances using these novel economic power plays and, well, technology in ways that really stretch the definition of an active war.
That's a good way to put it. Stretching the definition.
So our mission today is pretty focused.
Right.
We want to understand the specific pressure points. What are Russia and the US actually exploiting here? And maybe even more crucially, how is Europe trying to navigate this? Or perhaps failing to navigate this really multifaceted new conflict?
Right. And our guide for this, our core source material, is that recent Tenenbaum analysis. We should be clear, this isn't just a quick news hit.
No, definitely not.
The Tenenbaum piece is a deep geopolitical risk assessment. It gives us that granular detail, the kind you need to really get behind the headlines and understand the strategic thinking, the intent behind these big global moves.
And the analysis kicks off with something that really grabs you, doesn't it? It highlights just how much the boundaries have shifted.
It does. The hook is, well, startling. Russian drones are now apparently routinely and openly flying over military air bases, not in some disputed zone, but in Germany, Norway, and Denmark, NATO territory.
Wow. Okay, so this isn't some theoretical threat anymore. It's
Yeah.
Moscow deliberately putting its hardware essentially right in NATO's face on their own turf.
Exactly. It signals a major shift.
Okay, let's unpack that immediate implication. Russian surveillance aircraft over NATO air bases, bases with critical infrastructure. It can't just be an accident, can it? It feels like a very calculated signal.
Oh, it's calculated. The analysis is quite clear on that. It moves the conflict you see from being primarily about Ukraine's borders to becoming a direct challenge, maybe even a threat, to the core of NATO's own defensive posture.
And the Tenenbaum analysis gives context on why these specific drones are being used, right? It ties back to what Russia learned or failed to learn maybe in the early parts of the Ukraine war.
Precisely. Russia found out pretty quickly that its initial drone fleet, well, it was expensive, it wasn't particularly sophisticated, technologically speaking, and it was really vulnerable to Ukrainian electronic warfare, specifically spoofing.
Right, spoofing. We hear that term a lot. Maybe just quickly for listeners, it's more than just jamming the signal, isn't it?
Yes, good point. It's much more sophisticated. Jamming just blasts noise, overpowers the drone's radio signal, cuts communication. Spoofing actually manipulates the signal, the GPS, or the comms link itself.
So you trick the drone.
You trick its computer, make it think it's somewhere else, or you feed it false commands, set it off course, maybe even make it crash. And the Ukrainians, according to the analysis, got exceptionally good at this. It rendered a lot of those early, expensive Russian drones pretty much useless.
Okay, so Russia's facing these really effective high-tech countermeasures. What did their engineers do? Did they fight tech with tech?
Surprisingly, no. It was almost the opposite, which is, well, kind of brilliant in its simplicity. They introduced drones connected by a physical cable back to the ground station.
A cable, like
Yeah.
literally tethered.
Literally tethered. The data goes through the wire, not wirelessly. The analysis points this out as a direct countermeasure to spoofing. You can't intercept or manipulate a signal that isn't being broadcast, right? It creates this unhackable data link.
That's remarkable. A physical cable to beat advanced electronic warfare. I mean, was that kind of old school thinking surprising to analysts?
Very surprising, yes. But it has a massive, obvious drawback range.
Of course, the cable length.
Exactly. A cable drone can't fly very far from its operator.
Hmm.
So it's useful for, say, localized tactical strikes, battlefield surveillance maybe, but not for deep penetration missions. So they needed something else simultaneously, a strategy for broader airspace dominance.
And that leads to the radar saturation strategy.
That's the one.
This is where it gets really fascinating, how they figured out how to overwhelm defenses without breaking the bank on high-tech gear. Walk us through how the Tenenbaum analysis explains this radar saturation idea.
Okay, think of it as an economic move dressed up as a military tactic.
Yeah.
The core idea is simple. You send clouds of really cheap, essentially disposable, unarmed drones along with your actual armed ones.
Decoys. Right?
Exactly, loads of them. The goal is pure information overload for the enemy radar. Instead of seeing, say, 100 real threats, The radar screen lights up with maybe 1,000, maybe 2,000 targets. The air defense system, whether it's human-operated or AI, just gets mathematically overwhelmed.
So the defender can't possibly sort the real threats from the fakes fast enough, and they can't afford to shoot at everything.
Precisely. Air defense systems have a limited number of interceptor missiles, and those missiles are incredibly expensive, millions sometimes.
Compared to the cost of these cheap decoy drones?
Which might be, what, a few $100s each? Maybe less.
Mhm.
The economic exchange ratio is just absurdly bad for the defender. It's the sheer volume, the confusion it creates, that defeats these very sophisticated, very expensive NATO air defense systems. Quantity has a quality all its own in this case.
Which brings us back full circle to those drones over Norway, Germany, Denmark. The analysis stresses these are the cheap, unarmed type. Why is that specific detail so critical for Putin's strategy right now?
It serves a dual purpose, according to the analysis. First, it tests NATO's reaction time. How fast do they scramble jets? How long does it take command centers to confirm it's unarmed? It gathers intelligence on their responsiveness.
Okay, probing the defenses.
And second, it generates chaos, political pressure, unease, all without actually committing an act of war, a casus belli, which we'll get into. This low-grade but high-impact disruption. It's key to Putin, showing he can destabilize Europe with almost zero cost, especially, as the analysis suggests, as a kind of retaliation for failed talks.
Okay, so shifting from the tactical drone games to the high-stakes geopolitical table, the Tenenbaum analysis seems to suggest this recent escalation, like the drones over NATO, is a direct result of a political failure. Specifically, the breakdown of that alleged sort of unofficial agreement between Trump and Putin up in Alaska. That was supposed to be the diplomatic off-ramp, wasn't it?
It was supposed to be, yes, an ambitious, maybe grand bargain is the term the analysis leans towards, although deeply cynical perhaps and really reliant on Trump's unique ability to try and force compliance on all sides.
Right.
The core parts, as laid out in the analysis, were pretty straightforward, though obviously brutal for Kyiv. First, Ukraine would effectively be forced to accept its territorial losses and formally surrender to stop the fighting.
To stop fighting, accept the lines on the map.
Basically, yes. Second, there'd be some kind of managed cosmetic change, that's the term used, so everyone could sort of claim a victory, leading to a quick peace agreement to stabilize things.
And the third piece was the crucial one for the future, that American security guarantee for Ukraine.
Yes, that was key. The U.S. promised to guarantee Ukraine's security after the surrender. This was meant to make swallowing the territorial losses a bit more palatable, maybe for Kyiv and the international community. But, and this is critical, the Tenenbaum analysis really highlights how this guarantee was dangerously misinterpreted, especially by European leaders.
How so? What was the misinterpretation?
Well, the Europeans apparently interpreted the U.S. guarantee as potentially giving them the right, down the line, to actually station European troops inside Ukraine if there was some future conflict or border skirmish.
Oh, and for Russia?
The moment Russia got wind of that interpretation, everything stopped. For Putin, having NATO troops or even NATO-aligned European troops on the ground in Ukraine, that was, and the analysis stresses this, it remains an absolute red line. Totally unacceptable.
And so the deal collapses on that point. But beyond the deal specifics, the analysis suggests Putin went into that Alaska meeting with a really deep-seated, almost historical expectation, didn't he?
He did. He wanted the relationship, the whole U.S.-Russia dynamic, to reset, to go back to an equal-to-equal dialogue.
Like the Soviet era.
Very much so, for a relationship of mutual respect, global power sharing, where Moscow's veto mattered on the world stage. Kind of like Moscow and Washington in the 70s or 80s. That deep desire for parity, the analysis argues, really underpinned his whole approach to those talks.
But the analysis is pretty blunt that the U.S. objectives were completely different. Washington had zero interest in treating Russia as an equal partner.
Not even close. The U.S. objective, according to Tenenbaum, was much more cold-bloodedly strategic. They saw potential utility, maybe, in aligning Russia against China down the road, but only after weakening Russia significantly through the Ukraine war.
So weaken them, make them need a partner?
And then offer the U.S. hand, but always as the senior partner, dictating terms. Putin, the analysis suggests, figured this out pretty quickly. He realized the Alaska meeting was just cosmetic, as the term was used. Trump doesn't really share power, and he certainly wasn't about to treat Putin's Russia as a peer state.
So when that realization dawned, when Putin understood the deal wasn't going his way and his status wasn't being respected, Trump didn't just walk away. He apparently switched immediately to maximum economic pressure.
That seems to be the sequence outlined.
Yeah.
An attempt to basically force compliance
Right.
by economically strangling Russia and its allies.
Right.
It wasn't just standard sanctions, it was much more aggressive.
How so? What were the specific moves?
Well, the analysis details several prongs. First, attacking Putin's supply chain allies. It mentions that Iran's industrial and military capacity, which was apparently crucial for making components for Russian drones, was reportedly destroyed by coordinated U.S. and Israeli actions. That hit Russia's ability to replenish its more advanced war material hard.
Okay.
Simultaneously, the U.S. sent warships into Venezuelan waters, hitting another key Russian ally right in their backyard.
And then the big one, the energy isolation strategy aimed at Europe.
Yes, that was the hammer blow. An ultimatum, essentially. Trump demanded the EU stop buying all Russian oil and gas immediately, and the threat was explicit. Refuse, and the U.S. might withdraw aid, withdraw its strategic protection.
Wow.
The goal was a full global economic chokehold. The plan, as described, even extended beyond Europe, aiming to pressure China and India, Russia's biggest remaining energy customers, to also stop buying. The idea was to completely wreck Russia's energy-dependent economy.
Okay, so this puts Europe in just an impossible position, doesn't it? They get this ultimatum: help us financially cripple Russia or risk your relationship with the U.S., your security guarantor. Now, the common thinking, what you often hear, is that Europe simply couldn't comply because they lack alternative energy sources. But the Tenenbaum analysis says that's actually wrong.
That's a really crucial distinction the analysis makes, and we need to emphasize it. Europe can physically find other gas suppliers. Qatar is still a huge producer, and Israel is rapidly becoming a gas superpower. The analysis suggests they might hold some of the largest reserves in the world now, so the physical resources are available.
It's not about availability, then?
No. The issue is purely economic, but it comes with this incredibly high social and political price tag attached.
If they can buy gas elsewhere, what's the real constraint? Why didn't they just flip the switch?
It's all about the price and the knock-on effects on political stability.
Yeah.
Russian energy, you see, is simply the cheapest, most reliable source Europe had built its infrastructure around. Switching to Qatari gas or Israeli gas that involves huge new investments in things like LNG terminals, pipelines, plus much higher transport costs. It means paying significantly more for the same amount of energy.
And that massive price hike has to be paid by someone.
By European governments, ultimately, which forces them to find the money by diverting funds from other places. And that's where the real problem lies, diverting it from deeply entrenched social programs.
And this gets us to the European welfare state, which the Tenenbaum analysis describes pretty sharply as a state of malcontent. It becomes the absolute political constraint.
Exactly. The European welfare state, structurally, is quite brittle. It's extremely sensitive to any cuts. People across the continent have built their lives, their expectations around these entitlements, pensions, subsidized healthcare, transport, guaranteed holidays, all of it.
They won't tolerate changes easily.
Not at all. Even small changes can cause massive political backlash. The analysis gives this incredible example from France. The government there was nearly brought down, facing huge civil unrest, just because they tried to cut 2 public holidays to help cover existing government debt.
2 days off. That really highlights how different the political reality is compared to, say, the U.S., a government almost collapsing over losing 2 vacation days. It makes cutting huge things like pension schemes or healthcare subsidies seem politically impossible.
Utterly impossible. So European leaders, according to this analysis, are trapped in this zero-sum game. There's no politically survivable path forward that satisfies the U.S. demand. They need vast sums for non-Russian energy. But the money has to come from one of 2 places, both politically toxic.
Option 1, cut social spending, welfare, pensions, holidays, and face immediate, potentially revolutionary public anger.
Right. Option 2, cut their huge spending commitments on climate change initiatives.
And why can't they cut the climate spending?
Because for many of the ruling parties, especially in Western Europe, that aggressive climate agenda is their core political identity, their main platform. Cutting that spending would be seen as a total failure, a surrender to opposition parties, possibly shattering their voter base if they're completely locked in.
So this internal political crisis, this paralysis, it's central to the Tenenbaum analysis. It paints a picture of a continent just too fractured internally to respond effectively to these huge external pressures coming from both Washington and Moscow.
The instability is deep and it's widespread. The analysis goes through some specifics. The UK, for instance, is described as being at crisis level.
Yeah.
You have a far-right party whose leader the analysis characterizes rather colorfully as having a sort of drunk public persona suddenly polling for an absolute majority.
Yeah.
That's a shocking shift for a party that barely had representation before.
Mhm.
Plus, they're grappling with this huge row over a proposed new national ID requirement, which is historically a very sensitive issue there.
And in the core Eurozone countries.
France is basically paralyzed legislatively. No stable government. The parliament is split three ways, making it almost impossible to pass any significant laws, especially the kind of budget reforms needed to pay for expensive new energy. Then you look at Spain. Prime Minister Sanchez is politically wounded, facing this major crisis with corruption charges against both his wife and his brother. The analysis suggests convictions and jail time are highly likely.
Crippling for a leader.
Absolutely. And even Germany, supposedly the stable anchor of Europe, is seeing significant rising support for the far right in key state elections.
And on top of all this political turmoil, there's an economic problem coming from an unexpected direction. The euro itself is getting stronger.
Yeah, it's a real paradox. A stronger euro against the dollar sounds good on the surface, right?
Yeah.
Stable currency.
Right.
But for Germany's economy, which relies massively on exports,
It makes their goods more expensive abroad.
exactly, it hurts their export engine, putting even more strain on an economy already dealing with high energy cost and all this political division. So the analysis concludes Europe right now is more of a geographical concept than a coherent political entity. It lacks independent agency.
And the proof is that their leaders flew to Alaska, met Trump, and ultimately accepted his terms, despite the political pain it would cause back home.
That seems to be the interpretation, and reinforce their status as, well, perhaps subservient actors caught between these larger powers, unable to chart their own course effectively.
Okay, so Trump lays down this ultimatum. Force Europe to economically suffocate Russia or else. Putin sees this, sees Europe buckling under the pressure. What's his response?
The analysis suggests it was immediate and quite calculated, almost like, okay, you want to destroy my economy, let me show you how easily I can hurt your allies' economies with basically nothing. That's exactly the mindset the analysis portrays. And this is where Putin's strategy of low-cost, high-impact disruption really comes into play. He needed to demonstrate to Europe very clearly that cooperating with Russia, or at least not actively trying to destroy its economy, was going to be far less painful than confrontation. And he did it without, firing missiles or anything kinetic.
And the prime example the Tenenbaum analysis points to is the Copenhagen shutdown.
Yes. Russia apparently sent some of those cheap, unarmed decoy drones we talked about earlier towards Copenhagen. The result, complete shutdown of Copenhagen Airport Kastrup for 2 full days.
And Copenhagen isn't just any airport. It's consistently one of Europe's top 5 hubs, right? For passengers, but critically for cargo and logistics, too.
Absolutely critical. The economic damage from closing down a major logistics artery like that for 48 hours.
Yeah.
It's staggering. It ripples through supply chains across the continent, and it vastly outweighs the negligible cost of the couple of drones that caused the initial panic and forced the shutdown.
A perfect demonstration of maximum economic pain for minimal Russian investment, proving they can paralyze European commerce almost at will.
That seems to be the message. And then there's the even more aggressive, though still non-kinetic, threat involving the undersea cables.
Ah, yes, the analysis mentioned this. This sounds particularly insidious.
It is. The analysis tracks the movement of a specific Russian ship, one apparently specialized in undersea operations, including cable cutting. This ship was positioned directly over the main bundle of critical undersea data cables running to Europe.
These aren't just for browsing the web, are they?
Oh, no. These are the literal nervous system of modern Europe. They carry almost all internet traffic, financial data, communications, connect AI infrastructure, handle intelligence sharing, everything.
So the implied threat is Russia cuts those cables and Europe goes dark, digitally paralyzed.
That's the clear implication, total chaos. And the cost to Russia for making this incredibly potent threat.
What does the analysis estimate?
The operational cost for just positioning that ship, around $200. It's
Yeah.
absolutely insane leverage ratio, the power to potentially cripple a continent's digital existence for essentially pocket change.
Which brings us back to that legal shield you mentioned, the casus belli factor. Why can't NATO just, intercept the ship or shoot down the drones?
Okay, let's define casus belli against Latin, meaning an act justifying war.
Sure.
Russia is operating meticulously in this legal gray area. According to international law, generally, you cannot legally open fire on an unarmed aircraft, like those drones over Germany or Denmark, especially if it's over international waters or hasn't actually attacked you.
So if NATO shot one down.
NATO might be seen as committing the first act of war. It would give Russia the very pretext it might be looking for. It flips the legal responsibility. Same with the ship. It's just sitting there, supposedly doing research in international waters. It hasn't actually cut the cables yet.
So they're maximizing the threat, maximizing the disruption, while staying just below the threshold that legally justifies a military response. It's
Right.
clever in a chilling way.
Deeply chilling. Now, this whole confrontation, this pressure campaign, it took a really sharp personal turn when Trump went to the UN, didn't it? And delivered that infamous tiger of paper insult aimed directly at Putin.
Right. That felt like a major escalation in rhetoric.
It was a calculated moment of public humiliation. Trump stood before the UN General Assembly and personally attacked Putin, called Russia a tiger of paper, specifically because they failed to conquer Ukraine in the single week they supposedly projected, and instead it was taking years. Trump even added that the U.S. military would never have taken so long. For Putin, who, as the analysis suggests, still craves that respect, especially from the U.S. president, this public shaming was a massive psychological blow.
And the Tenenbaum analysis connects this insult directly to a shift in Russian actions on the ground.
It does. It suggests that this personal humiliation directly drove Putin's decision to immediately accelerate attacks against civilian populations and infrastructure in Ukraine. It was a brutal projection of strength, almost a desperate need to prove he was not a paper tiger.
A terrible reaction. But the analysis also notes something else significant that happened right after those insults.
Yes, almost immediately after Trump's very public, very harsh words, the official Russian tone shifted dramatically.
The message got through.
It seemed so. All the aggressive, maximalist rhetoric suddenly softened overnight. Russian officials started saying things like the Ukraine situation is complex, that it needs negotiation. It was a clear signal, according to the analysis, that the U.S. strategic message delivered through that combination of the economic chokehold threat and the very personal UN humiliation had landed. They heard it. They seemed ready to reconsider talks, though obviously the terms remain very much up in the air.
Okay, so we've got this intense dynamic between the U.S. and Russia, with Europe caught in the middle. But let's bring in the third major player here, China. While Moscow and Washington are locked in this confrontation, the Tenenbaum analysis points out that Beijing is dealing with its own massive internal problems, which really limit its ability to act decisively on the global stage.
That's a really important piece of the puzzle. China, according to the analysis, is facing very serious, almost existential internal economic issues right now. The economy is described quite starkly as catatonic. Their stock market is apparently only being held up by massive, direct government intervention.
Not a sign of underlying health.
Not at all. The analysis mentions money markets being completely unstable. Investors apparently sell off assets the moment the government isn't actively propping things up. It sounds like a house of cards, really, only sustained by constant state support.
And this internal fragility is exactly why Trump's threat to maintain or even increase tariffs is so potent against Beijing. It forces them to the negotiating table with Washington.
Precisely. China is reportedly desperate to negotiate lower tariffs with the U.S. right now. If those high tariffs stay in place, or worse, if Europe caves to Trump's pressure and adds its own high tariffs on Chinese goods, well, the analysis suggests China faces a truly catastrophic economic crisis.
And this fear is driving some aggressive moves from China itself.
Yes, it seems to be prompting a kind of economic warfare against Europe, ironically. The analysis claims China is deliberately flooding European markets with incredibly cheap products, everything from electric cars to apparently actual waste products at what it calls derisory prices.
Why? To undercut European producers.
Exactly, to actively destroy established local European industries, forcing Europe to remain dependent on Chinese imports, thus keeping that export engine running, even if profit margins are terrible. It's a defensive, almost desperate measure to stave off that internal crisis.
Now, this vulnerability in traditional state powers like China and the way these negotiations are happening, it seems to be opening the door for something the analysis calls court politics. The recent deal involving TikTok is presented as a key example.
Yes, the TikTok negotiation is fascinating in this context. What really stands out, according to the analysis, is how a single American corporation, Oracle, ended up being written directly into the fabric of an international agreement. This wasn't just about data security. It touched on national surveillance concerns.
How did Oracle fit in?
China essentially agreed to create a completely separate copy of its critical TikTok software, specifically for the U.S. market. And Oracle was explicitly named as the supervising entity, overseeing the entire operation to ensure compliance and security from a U.S. perspective. Think about that. It wasn't State Department diplomats overseeing the technical details. It was a state basically making an agreement with a corporation.
That signals a huge shift. The direct involvement of these massive American companies in what used to be purely state-to-state geopolitical
It
affairs.
does. And this leads us to unpack that term, corp politics. The analysis makes a very strong, data-driven case that the largest global companies are now, in purely economic terms, structurally more powerful than many traditional
How
nation-states.
powerful are we talking?
The numbers are staggering, and they force you to rethink what power even means today. 9 out of the 10 most valuable companies in the world right now are in AI or related tech sectors. Now, look at the top 3 currently. NVIDIA, Microsoft, Google. The Tenenbaum analysis states flatly that each one of those companies individually has a higher GDP equivalent than the entire national economy of Germany.
Higher GDP than Germany. Each. That's hard to even
It
process.
is. We're talking about non-state actors wielding economic clout that simply dwarfs major historical powers like Germany, France, or the UK.
And crucially, they're starting to use that power not just in the marketplace, but to directly influence and even challenge national laws and regulations.
That's the core structural threat highlighted. The analysis details Apple's recent, very direct threat to the European Union. Apple apparently told the EU quite bluntly that it would seriously consider pulling out of Europe entirely if the EU went ahead with its proposed new laws on AI and digital data management.
That's corporate blackmail on a continental scale.
It really is. And it leads to this idea that the conflicts between these tech giants, say Microsoft versus Google in the AI space, are becoming, in many practical ways, more strategically important and certainly more economically impactful than traditional diplomatic spats between countries like, say, France and China.
So, if these corporations have overwhelming economic power, increasingly shape regulations, and control the critical digital infrastructure, what's left for the traditional nation state? What unique power do they still hold?
According to the analysis, there's really only one major monopoly left that states currently possess: the monopoly of force, their armies, their military hardware.
The ability to wage war.
Yes. But even that final bastion is rapidly eroding. Look at modern warfare. Look at Russia-Ukraine right now. It's increasingly dominated by drones, by AI targeting systems, by cyber warfare. And who is developing and will soon be manufacturing these critical technologies?
Not state-owned arsenals anymore.
Increasingly, no. It will be these powerful corporations, Amazon with its logistics and cloud power, Oracle managing data, Google and Microsoft with their AI dominance. The analysis suggests states will become reliant on these corporations even for their ultimate defense capabilities. The monopoly of force is becoming contingent on corporate technology.
Okay, so if the nature of conflict is shifting so dramatically towards technology, towards AI and drones, then time itself becomes a critical factor, doesn't it? The analysis argues that time currently favors Ukraine, specifically because of their rapid adoption of AI.
Yes, it's about technological leapfrogging. The analysis uses this striking phrase that AI provides an advantage equivalent to 100 years of tank development. That's the scale of the disruptive potential here. This tech is drastically accelerating Ukraine's ability to defend itself, to target effectively, potentially even to think about reconquering lost territory, despite Russia's advantages in sheer numbers or traditional hardware.
And Trump's tiger of paper speech at the UN, the analysis suggests, was partly designed to hammer this point home to Putin.
Exactly. It was a strategic message. Negotiate now, yield now, because the technological clock is ticking against you. If you wait, Ukraine will solidify this AI advantage, and within a year or so, they might realistically be able to push you back. That was the implicit threat behind the public insult.
So let's play this out. If Russia doesn't yield, if they ignore the economic threats, ignore the technological warnings, and refuse to genuinely negotiate, what's the potential next move for the U.S. to demonstrate its resolve to reassert dominance without necessarily triggering a full-scale war with Russia and Europe? The analysis points somewhere surprising.
It does. The potential next step cited isn't in Europe at all. It's the putative bombardment of Venezuelan military bases.
Venezuela? Why Venezuela?
Well, publicly, the justification would likely be framed around targeting drug trafficking operations, providing that layer of plausible deniability. But strategically, it serves multiple purposes according to the analysis. First, it hits another key Russian ally, Venezuela, right in America's backyard, showing reach and capability. Second, it demonstrates a willingness to use decisive force, but outside the main European theater, potentially avoiding direct escalation with Russia there.
And the analysis suggests this wouldn't just be a message to Russia and Venezuela.
No, it's also seen as potentially a very strong warning shot aimed much closer to home at Mexico,
Mexico, why?
particularly given the current Mexican president's perceived antagonism and sometimes quite aggressive public statements towards Trump and U.S. interests. The message would be pretty unambiguous. Look what we just did to Venezuela, which is relatively far away. We can certainly do something similar to you if you push things too far. It's projecting power in the hemisphere.
So ultimately, whether it's economic blockades, these drone incursions, the cable ship threats, or even potential military strikes in Latin America, all of these power plays seem incredibly dependent on the image projected by the leaders involved, particularly Putin and Trump. They both have to maintain this aura of strength, of decisiveness, don't they?
Absolutely critical. That image management is paramount for both of them to retain power and influence. The analysis even highlights a specific instance where Trump seemed to briefly step back from the geopolitical stage, focusing instead on a domestic issue, the Washington crime debate.
And the Russians notice.
Immediately, the analysis suggests they interpreted that brief pause, that shift in focus, as a moment of potential weakness or distraction. And their reaction: they decide to press the accelerator, leading directly to intensified horrific bombings of civilian targets in Ukraine. Any perceived hesitation, any crack in that facade of strength is seen as an opening and ruthlessly exploited.
So Trump had to respond.
He did, by becoming, according to the analysis, even more serious, perhaps even more unpredictable in his geopolitical demands and rhetoric, forcefully reasserting his dominance on the global stage. It's a constant high-stakes game of perception management. Hashtag tag outro.
Wow. Okay, so stepping back, this deep dive into the Tenenbaum analysis really paints a picture of a fundamentally changed landscape. The U.S.-Russia conflict isn't just Cold War 2.0. We've moved into something much more unstable, haven't we? Defined by this asymmetric economic warfare, these low-cost but high-impact tactical games, and maybe most profoundly, the overwhelming, almost unaccountable influence of these giant tech corporations.
Exactly. We've shifted from that bipolar Cold War model, where two superpowers held most of the cards, into this new era, the age of core politics, as the analysis terms it. And right now, Europe seems to be caught as the weakest link in this chain. It's politically divided, economically paralyzed by its own social contract promises, and seemingly unable to respond effectively to either the demands from Washington or these constant low-grade but highly disruptive threats from Moscow, like the airport shutdowns and the cable ship positioning. The very rules of global power feel like they've been rewritten under our feet.
They really do. So here's the provocative final thought we want to leave you with. Drawing directly from where this analysis leads us, we've just discussed how the economic power of the biggest tech companies now dwarfs that of major nations like Germany. We know they're increasingly controlling the critical digital infrastructure, and the analysis suggests they're soon going to dominate the manufacturing of the advanced AI and drone technology that defines modern warfare. So the question is, how long until we see a major conflict actually started or managed or maybe even concluded, not by a country, but by a corporation? What does national sovereignty even mean anymore in the age of court politics?
That is a fascinating and, frankly, a pretty unsettling question for a future that seems to be arriving much faster than we thought. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
We'll see you next time.